Don't bother. It's just Ifunanya.
No, you don't. I'm only standing
Stay away from me!
The woman who's supposed to be a mother crept to her bathing water in the dead of the night and poured dark powder into it to destroy her beauty. She was not a stranger, not an enemy from afar, her own stepmother. She made a prince see a monster where there was only beauty, and she thought she had destroyed her destiny forever, but she was wrong. This is the story of a girl named Ifunanya, a name that means love. A girl who was rejected by a prince, worked as a servant in her own father's house, humiliated before the entire village, and still became queen. But before you hear how she rose, you must first understand everything that was done to bring her down. In the heart of Igbo land, beyond the ancient hills and the deep forests, where the air smells of wet earth and burning firewood, there stood a village called Umudara. Umudara was old, older than the tallest iroko tree that stood like a guardian at its entrance, older than the stories the grandmothers told. The people of Umudara believed with every breath that their ancestors still walked among them at night, watching and guarded them into the wind. And in that village, there lived a man named Chike. Chike was not the richest man in Umudara, but he was perhaps the most content. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his arms carved by years of tilling red earth. His hands were rough and dry, but they were steady hands, hands that built and hands that never destroyed. But what made the people of Umudara truly respected Chike was not his strength alone. It was the way he loved his wife, Amaka. Amaka was as gentle as the first light of morning, the kind of light that did not blind but warms. Her beauty did not shout, it glowed quietly. Together, Chike and Amaka were like two palm trees growing from the same roots. No one could fall without the other feeling it. They had one daughter, a little girl named Ifunanya. Ifunanya was 5 years old. Her name meant love, and truly she was the heartbeat of their home. She had her mother's gentle eyes and her father's playful smile. She asked questions about everything she touched. Every morning before the cock crowed twice, Chike would rise from his raffia mat, wash his face and tie his wrapper firmly. Amaka would sit beside him. "Are you leaving already?" she asked. "My dear, the farm awaits for no man. I need to go and prepare her tomorrow." He never returned home empty-handed. Some evenings, it was ripe plantains balanced on his broad shoulder. Other evenings, fresh vegetables of bushmeat wrapped in leaves. And the moment Ifunanya spotted his shadow, she ran to hug her father. "Papa has returned. Papa is here." At night, Chike and his family sat under the great moonlight. The scent of roasted yam mixed with palm oil drifted through the warm air and crickets sang. Chike told stories and Amaka braided Ifunanya's hair with gentle fingers. And in this their quiet moments, peace settled over their compound that even the stars seemed to notice. The villagers admired them. Life in Umudara moved like a calm river until the coughing began. It started on a quiet harmattan evening. Amaka coughed lightly while stirring soup over the fire. Chike looked at her and asked, "Are you well?" "It's nothing, my dear. It's just a slight cough. The smoke entered my throat," she said. But the cough returned the next day, and the next, and then came the fever. Her skin burned beneath his touch. Her strength, once quiet and steady, began to fall away like leaves in harmattan. She could no longer carry water from the stream without stopping to rest. Even pounding fufu became a battle. Chike began returning from farm earlier than usual. He sat beside her mat each evening, wiping her forehead with a damp cloth. "This sickness is not ordinary," Chike said. When the women of Umudara heard Amaka was sick, they came with herbs and warm soup. He prayed over her and sang softly. But Mama Ebere, the elder, shook her head one afternoon and said, "This fever is stubborn. I have not seen it before." The next morning, Chike went to fetch Dibia Nwosu, the village herbalist. The old man arrived wearing beads around his neck, carrying a leather pouch filled with roots and herbs. When he entered the hut, even the air felt heavy. For days, the Dibia returned. He prepared bitter concoction, prayed to the ancestors, but Amaka only grew weaker. Her laughter disappeared and her voice became faint, like a song heard from far across. One evening, as the sky grew darker, she called Chike closer. "Please, sit beside me." Chike knelt down for her. "If I don't rise from this mat, promise me something." "You will rise, my dear. Promise me, please." Anything you ask for," Chike said. "Do not let bitterness enter your heart, and do not let our daughter grow without love. Love her for both of us," she said. Before dawn the next morning, her breathing stopped. "Amaka," Chike shouted. "Amaka," he cried out loud. But her spirit had already walked beyond its reach. His cry pierced the quiet morning with a spear. Women rushed into the compound, and wailing rose like a sudden storm. Little Ifunanya stood confused, clutching her father's wrapper with both hands. "Papa, why is Mama not waking up?" she asked. The burial lasted 3 days. Drums beat slowly, a rhythm of grief, not celebration. Women sang sorrowful songs that carried her name into the sky. The elders poured palm wine onto the earth and called upon their ancestors to receive Amaka. For months afterwards, Chike wore mourning clothes. He withdrew from festivals. He stopped visiting neighbors, and his laughter, once so easy, so full, disappeared completely. At night, he sat outside alone, staring at the moonlight, but the moon felt colder now. Everything felt colder. 2 years passed, and Ifunanya grew taller. She swept the compound without being asked. She fetched water each morning, and she tried to smile for her father, but she often reached for her mother's hand in the night and found only empty air. The villagers began to whisper. Mama Ebere said, "A child needs a mother's hand. A man cannot farm, cook, and raise a daughter alone." The elders called Chike to a meeting and sat him down with them. "A river that refuses new water would dry up and die. Your daughter needs warmth, and so do you, my son," an elder said. "My heart is still in pain," Chike said. The elder looked at him and said, "We know, but pain and love can live in the same chest. You must not close one to protect the other." And so, slowly, like a man stepping with bare feet into cold water, Chike agreed. And as he prepared to open his compound to another woman, the wind that passed through Umudara carried a warning no one heard. But sometimes, when a man invites help into his house, he unknowingly invites a storm. The day Adaku entered Chike's compound as his wife, Umudara celebrated. Marriage in the village was not simply between a man and a woman. It was between families, between ancestors and destinies. Kola nuts were broken. Elders prayed for peace and fruitfulness. Chike had agreed to remarry for one reason alone, for his daughter Ifunanya. She was 7 now, and she needed warmth and a mother's presence. Adako, his new wife, arrived, wearing bright beads and a deep blue wrapper. Her smile was wild and respectful. Beside her stood her daughter, Ngozi, who was slightly older than Ifunanya. She was holding her mother's hand with quiet confidence. "You are welcome to your new home," Chike said. That evening, Adaku knelt before Ifunanya, placed both hands gently on the girl's shoulder, and looked into her eyes. "From today henceforth, I'm your mother, and I will take good care of you," she said. "Listen to your mother, Ifunanya," Chike said. "Always obey her at all times." Ifunanya nodded quietly and respectfully, but something in her small chest felt tight. like clothes wrapped too firmly around the ribs. The first weeks passed peacefully. Adaku rose early, swept the compound and cooked well, even greeted neighbors warmly. The villagers praised Chike. The neighbors said, "You have found a good wife. Umudara smiles for you." Chike began to relax. Perhaps life could balance again. But peace sometimes is like a thin clay pot, beautiful to look at, yet fragile enough to crack. It began with small things. Adaku will always tell Ifunanya, "Go and fetch water. Make sure you pound that yam. And make sure you wash the clothes that have soaked." At first, the chores seemed normal. Every girl in Umudara worked, right? So her father thought. But then, the chores grew heavier when her father is not around. Ifunanya carried large bundles of firewood alone, while Ngozi sat beneath the mango tree braiding her hair. Ifunanya would fetch water for the whole compound alone. Her stepsister, on the other hand, rested and ate roasted corn in the shade. One afternoon, Ifunanya gathered her courage. "Mama, all the water pots are empty. Can Ngozi come with me? By the time I will fill them all alone, it will be dark." "Do you question me?" her stepmother replied. "No, Mama." "Then go and fetch the water." Ifunanya went alone. She walked back and forth from the stream until the sun began to descend. By the time the last pot was filled, her arms trembled and her feet ached. She stepped into the compound to find Ngozi still in the shade, unbothered, licking the salt from her fingers. That night, Ifunanya laid on her mat. Her muscles were burning. She pressed her face into her sleeping clothes so no one could hear her cry. She missed her mother so much, not just her presence, but the way her mother had corrected her with love and with softness. The harshness grew worse with every season. Ifunanya's portion of food shrank. The best pieces of meat went to her stepsister's plate, Ngozi. Every pot and every water to fetch was Ifunanya's work. One evening, a clay pot slipped from Ifunanya's tired hands and shattered on the floor. Before she could speak and before she could even draw a breath, her stepmother shouted from behind, "You are a careless and useless girl." Tears sprang to Ifunanya's eyes. At the exact moment, her father Chike stepped through the doorway. "What is going on here?" he asked. She broke the water pot. "I was only trying to correct her, nothing more." "Ifunanya, is that true?" "Yes, Papa. I broke it by mistake. I'm so sorry. You have to be careful next time, okay?" The moment Chike's footstep faded as he walked out, Adaku leaned down until her face was inches from Ifunanya. "If you ever speak against me to your father, what you feel now will be nothing compared to what follows." Fear settled quietly inside Ifunanya's heart, and silence became her only shield. Many years passed, and Ifunanya grew. Her beauty unfolded the way a rare flower opens slowly, quietly without performance. Her skin glowed with health. Her posture carried a natural grace, and her eyes held a depth that made people stop mid-sentence to look again. "That girl is becoming something extraordinary," people will say. Young men took longer paths home just to walk past Chike's compound. Elders nodded warmly when she greeted them. And by the time Ifunanya turned 18, her name had begun to travel like a harmattan wind through Umudara and beyond. But inside her father's compound, that beauty was treated like a crime. Her stepsister Ngozi was lovely too. But Ngozi's beauty required efforts. It required fine clothes, heavy beads, and careful arrangements. Ifunanya's beauty, on the other hand, required nothing. Her beauty was simply effortless, undeniable. And to Adaku, that was a threat she could no longer ignore. She will overshadow my daughter. As long as Ifunanya shines, Ngozi will always stand in her shadow, she thought to herself. In Umudara, the villagers spoke in hushed tones of a woman who had lived beyond the dark forest. A woman who dealt not in herbs and healing, but in things that could bend someone's destiny, things that can twist the fate of a man. That night, as thunder shook the sky, Adaku made a decision. She covered her face with a dark cloth and slipped quietly into the forest path. The hut of Mama Onora stood crooked behind a canopy of ancient trees. Strange symbols had been carved into the wooden door. Smoke drifted from the roof even when no fire was visible. The trees around it leaned away slightly, as if they, too, did not trust what lived inside. Before Adaku could knock, the door creaked opened. Inside the hut, the air smelled of burnt herbs and older things. Clay pot bubbled softly on low fires. Bundle of roots and dried leaves hung from the ceiling like dark curtains. "You are welcome. What brings you here?" she said. Adaku sat on the floor quietly and said, "There is a girl. Her beauty threatens my daughter's future. I want her light dimmed." "You want her light dimmed?" "Yes," Adaku replied. "You know, every charm has a price. When you touch someone's destiny, the destiny touches back. I have seen women come here with hearts like yours, and I have seen what followed them home." "I am ready," Adaku said. Mama Onora studied her carefully. Then she turned to the table and began to work. She crushed dried leaves into a fine dark powder and poured it slowly into a small calabash. She handed the calabash to Adaku. "Sprinkle this where she bathes before the next full moon." Adaku took the calabash. Her finger trembled not from doubt but from urgency. When she stepped back into the night, the forest felt heavier. Even the crickets were quiet. Back in the compound, Ifunanya sat outside alone, gazing up at the star. A strange unease moved through her chest, like the feeling of a dream she couldn't remember. She pressed her hand to her heart. The moon above her was nearly full, and somewhere in the shadow, her fates were already being rewritten. The New Yam Festival arrived, and the village square overflowed with life. Masquerade danced. The smell of roasted yam and fresh palm oil hung over everything like a warm blessing. Drums echoed from every corner, and children chased each other between the legs of elders. The young maidens were called in the center to dance. When Ifunanya stepped into the circle, something changed. She wore no expensive bead, only a simple wrapper and a modest coral necklace that had only belonged to her late mother. She moved like flowing water. Her feet touched the earth lightly. She did not dance with effort. She danced the way breath comes naturally without thought. As if the drums were her heartbeats made visible, the crowd went quiet. Among the honored guests under the decorated canopy sat Prince Obiora, the first son of King Ezudo of the neighboring kingdom of Opinagu. He had come to observe the festival and strengthen ties between the two communities. He had expected drums and food and pleasantries. He had not expected this. "Who is she?" he asked. "That is Ifunanya, my prince. She is the daughter of Chike the farmer," a palace attendant replied. The prince did not look away for a long time. Adaku saw everything across the square. She saw the prince's stillness. She saw the admiration pouring from the crowd, and she felt something inside her chest ignite, hot and terrible and urgent. That evening, palace messengers arrived at Mr. Chike's compound carrying kola nuts and palm wine in formal vessels. Prince Obiora, first son of King Ezudo, has expressed his interest in your daughter Ifunanya. He wishes to begin the proper discussions, a messenger said. Chike stood speechless. Tears foamed in the corners of his eyes. Ifunanya covered her mouth with both hands. Adaku smiled, but her hands were already calculating. "What wonderful news! We are so honored," she said. But in her heart, it was like a storm. A prince's bride? If Ifunanya becomes a prince's wife, Ngozi, her daughter, will live her entire life in her shadow and she will never escape. That night, Adaku waited until every soul in the compound slept. Then she rose. The full moon was already out. It was time. When Ifunanya stepped away from her bathing spot to fetch her sponge, Adaku slipped forward and poured the dark powder into the water. It dissolved instantly, without foam and without any trace. Let the prince who desires her now see what will drive him away forever, she said, then turned and walked back inside. The next morning, nothing seemed different. Ifunanya woke up, bathed and dressed as usual. She walked to the stream and the usual chores followed. 3 days later, Prince Obiora returned to Chike's compound accompanied by his younger brother Chitepere and 2 other palace attendants. His face was bright and eager, the face of a man with a decision already made. Ifunanya stepped forward respectfully. Her head was bowed slightly. The moment Obiora raised his eyes to her face, he staggered backwards as if struck by something invisible. A gasp escaped his throat because what he saw was not the graceful dancer who had stolen the breath of an entire festival. Before him stood something twisted and terrible. Her face looked terrible and beyond recognition. He blinked and squeezed his eyes shut, then he opened them again. The vision remained. "What happened to her?" he whispered to his guards. "My prince, I don't understand. What is the matter?" The guards said. "Can you not see it? Can you truly not see what I'm seeing?" The guard looked at Ifunanya carefully, then back at the prince. His expression was pure confusion. "She is as beautiful as she has always been, my prince." But Obiora's heart was pounding so violently, you could feel it in his teeth every time Ifunanya looked up at him. The image intensified. He could not breathe and he could not think. He stepped back. Her father Chike walked up to him. "My prince, is something wrong?" The prince looked at Chike in the eyes and said, "I believe there had been a misunderstanding. I cannot continue with these discussions. Please forgive me. It was a misunderstanding." Ifunanya was speechless. She did not understand what had just happened. Adaku looked at Chike like someone who was confused. "What just happened?" she said, but deep down in her mind, she was happy that her plans worked. The whispers began the next morning and spread like smoke through both villages. "The prince has changed his mind," one villager said. "But she's the most beautiful maiden in all of Umudara. What could have driven him away?" Ifunanya heard it all. She walked back to her sleeping space, sat on her mat and let the tears come. "I did not ask to be chosen," she said to herself. "Why choose me only to shame me?" She was not mourning love. She had barely known the prince. She was mourning the possibility, the future that had opened before her like a bright white road and then vanished overnight for some reason she could not understand. Her stepmother Adaku watched her from afar as she cried with a cold smile. Hadako still did not rest. She returned to Mama Honora a second time. I want my daughter to be irresistible to the prince. You know, since he did not marry Ifunanya, I want the prince to marry my daughter Ngozi. I want her in that palace. Mama Honora looked at her and said, magic can twist the heart, but it always unravels eventually. I do not care. Do what you must do, Adako said. One evening, not long after, Ifunanya sat alone beneath the Udara tree at the edge of her father's land. She was not crying again. She had moved past tears into a quiet place. But the silence that comes after grief had finished its first storm. As she sat there, footsteps approached on the path. She looked up and saw a tall young man. It was Prince Chidebere, Obiara's younger brother. He stood a respectful distance away from her. Ifunanya immediately stood up and bowed respectfully. Prince Chidebere looked at her and said, I want to say that I'm sorry for what happened. What my brother did was not right. Your brother owes me nothing. He was free to change his mind, she said. Yes, but something is not right about the way it happened. I have known my brother Obiora all my life. That fear in his eyes, I have never seen it before. It did not come from inside of him. Everyone sees beauty when they look at me, Ifunanya said. It's only your brother that sees something else, and whatever that something else is, it was powerful enough to push him away. That does not happen by accident, she said. The Moonlight Festival came, and Ngozi walked into the village square wearing a red cloth and shining beads. The moment Prince Obiora gazed upon her, he set down his cup and he did not look away. She is very beautiful, he said. He stood up and walked towards Ngozi. The villagers watched in surprise. This was the same prince who has turned away the most admired girl in Umudara. Now, he is walking towards her stepsister with open admiration. I have searched for a woman worthy to stand beside me as my queen. Tonight, I have found her and I wish to begin the proper marriage rites with this maiden. The whole village erupted in conversations. Hadako stepped forward. Her smile was barely hidden and her eyes were bright with victory. Ngozi lowered her head, shyly. The marriage preparations came quickly. Prince Obiora married Ngozi. Hadako could not contain her joy. After the marriage, Prince Chidebere came often to Umudara, and he walked with Ifunanya to the stream. He helped her carry firewood without even being asked. He sat under the Udara tree and spoke with her. Their conversations grew longer and slowly their friendship blossomed into something beautiful. One evening, he turned and faced Ifunanya and said, I have watched you carry what would have broken most people. I have watched you labored in silence, and through all of it, you have not become a bitter person. I admire you a lot, not just because of your beauty, but because of your strength. Ifunanya looked at him carefully. I wish to ask for your hand in marriage before my brother's coronation. I want you to be my wife, Ifunanya, he said, looking at her in the eye. Ifunanya looked at him and a single tear fell down from her cheek. But this one, for the first time in years, it is not for pain. The coronation day arrived and the palace of Obinagu was draped in white clothes and fresh palm folds. Drums echoed from the hills and chiefs from far kingdoms arrived in processions. Inside the altar, Prince Obiora knelt. The chief priest stepped forward and raised his staff up. Today, we are gathered to crown the rightful heir to the throne of Obinagu. Let our ancestors guide us. Obiora stepped forward confidently and the crown was lifted. Suddenly, the priest shouted with a loud voice, "Stop!" Then he turned to the crowd and said, "The rightful heir to the throne is not Obiora." "What? What nonsense is this?" Obiora stood up. "I have trained my entire life for this crown. I am the first son. Yes, you are the first son of your mother, but not the son of the late king." Obiora looked at his mother and said, "Mother, tell me this is a lie. Tell me it is not true." "It is true, my son. I'm very sorry. I was already with child before I married your father. Your father knew about it, but we decided to keep it a secret." Obiora staggered. His legs nearly went under him. Ngozi's composed expression shattered. Adaku's hands began to shake, all applauding all the charms and all those quiet journeys into the dark forest. None of it could touch what was written in the blood of the kings. The chief priest looked up and said, "The rightful heir to the throne of Obinagu is the second son, Prince Chidebere, born of the lawful and completed union of King Gezudo and the queen. Let the crown be brought to him immediately." Prince Chidebere stepped forward. The crown was placed on his head. The drums thundered with joy. "Long live King Chidebere!" King Chidebere raised his staff. The drums slowed and there was silence. "My people, before today, before any of this, I asked a woman to walk beside me, not for her position and not for her family name. I had watched her carry rejection and betrayal in silence. I had never once seen her become what those things tried to make her. I asked her because she is everything I would want beside me, and I want her to face what comes with this crown with me." He turned and walked towards Ifunanya in the crowd. The assembling part, the villagers stared. Palace officials murmured. Adaku's face had gone entirely white. He stopped before Ifunanya and extended his hand. "Ifunanya, daughter of Chike of Umudara, will you stand beside me as my wife?" Tears filled Ifunanya's eyes, not the tears of a woman defeated. It was not the tears she had cried silently in her sleeping clothes. These tears were different. They were tears of something end at last. Slowly, she placed her hand into his. "I will," she said. The crowd exploded with joy. Chidebere raised her hand high before the assembly. "Behold your queen." Then suddenly, the chief priest slowly stepped forward and raised his staff. The hall became silent, and he spoke in a loud voice. Everyone froze. "The spirits have shown me that a great injustice was done," the chief priest said. Murmurs spread across the hall. "What injustice?" the elders asked. The chief priest continued. "A charm was placed on Ifunanya so that Prince Obiora would see her as something terrible. This wicked act was done by someone inside our own home." The crowd gasped in shock. All eyes turned towards Adaku. Her face became pale. The chief priest pointed his staff at her. "Adaku, the spirits have spoken your name." Adaku's body began to shake, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then suddenly she fell to her knees. "It is true," she cried. "I did it. I was afraid that Ifunanya will rise above my daughter. I went to the forest and brought a charm to destroy her chance with the prince. Please forgive me." The crowd erupted with anger. Then the chief priest lifted his hand for silence. "In this kingdom, jealousy and evil cannot be rewarded," he said firmly. "Adaku, from this day henceforth, you are hereby banished from this kingdom, never to return again." Adaku began to cry, but the guards were already leading her away. Ngozi followed behind her in shame. They left the village and were never welcomed back. And before the whole kingdom, King Chidebere and Ifunanya were joined in marriage. Ifunanya's father Chike walked up to her and said, "My daughter, I was blind. I used to be in the farm all day trying to provide for my family, and I did not see what was happening inside my own walls. Please, can you forgive me, my daughter?" "Papa, you gave me everything Mama asked you to give me. You kept your heart open. You gave me love even when you did not know I needed more of it. That is not blindness. That is a father trying to do his best." The villagers came to offer their blessings. Elders smiled, and young men and women who had grown up alongside Ifunanya cheered. Every face carried the same expression, the deep satisfaction of watching goodness rewarded at last. Jealousy is a seed that once planted into a bitter heart, it grows quickly towards darkness. Adako tried to steal Ifunanya's future, and for a time, it seemed she had succeeded. The prince turned away. Another woman wore the beads that should have been for Ifunanya. But destiny is not a clay pot that can be broken by one careless hand. Charms can bend a man's sides, but they cannot bend what destiny have written. Truth will always uncover what deception tries to bury, and the light of a good soul, no matter how many shadows are thrown across it, will always in its own time find its way through. Please like, comment and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this.